Welcome to Words on the Outside with Laura Bynum. The author of today's reading has won the MacArthur Fellows Program Genius Grant, the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, the Langston Hughes Medal, and had her novel, Breath, Eyes, Memory, chosen as an Oprah's Book Club selection. Please enjoy Edwidge Danticat reading from her memoir, Brother, I'm Dying.
Transition. There's a stage in labor called transition, when the baby, preparing to separate from the mother, twists and turns to pass through the birth canal. I am sure there's a similar stage for exiting life, though it might be less definitive. Still, as I go into labor with my daughter, each time I wish for an easy transition for my daughter and myself, I wish the same for my dying father. Our midwife, Colleen, encouraged me to add some personal touches to the lavender labor room at the birthing center, so I brought 2 old photos of my mother and father. In his picture, my father is a handsome, serious-looking 26-year-old. He's wearing a pale jacket, a high-collared shirt, a pencil-thin tie, and glasses. My mother and hers is wearing a check blouse with a giant button on the front. Her hair is straightened and her round face framed by small star-shaped drop earrings. When the midwife sees my mother's picture, she thinks that my mother is me. I looked at my parents' sepia-toned faces intermittently during the 16 hours that I walked, lay down, sat in a tub, on a ball, on a toilet, in constant agony. How could my mother have done this 4 times, I wondered. My mother once briefly told me the story of my birth. I was nearly born in a pebbled courtyard outside the maternity ward of Port-au-Prince's General Hospital. My father was out of the city for his work, and my mother, fiercely independent, proud and alone, was one of nearly a dozen women who were doubled over and wailing in the yard. There were too many of them and not enough doctors. No one even examined them until their babies crowned. During her 4 hours of active labor, my mother tried very hard not to wish death upon herself. She staggered in and out of consciousness until a doctor finally surfaced and rushed her into the delivery room. When my daughter was born, her face blood-tinted, her eyelids swollen with tiny light pink patches that the midwife called angel kisses, her body coiled around itself as if to echo the tightness of her tiny fist. When she was born, I instantly saw it as one of many separations to come. She was leaving my body and going into the world where she would spend the rest of her life moving away from me. Groggy and exhausted, I asked the midwife, "Is it normal for me to think this?" "Maybe you're one of those women who enjoys being pregnant," she said. It wasn't so much that I enjoyed being pregnant. I simply liked the fact that for a while, my daughter and I had been inseparable. Looking at her tiny face, her bow-shaped lips so red that her father said she looked like she was wearing lipstick, I remembered a message a girlfriend had sent me when my first niece and nephew, my brother Bob's daughter Nadira, and Carl's son Ezekiel were born. "May you be a reposoir," my friend had written, a place where children can rest. I needed to rest myself, but I also wanted to speak to my daughter, cradle her, sing to her, inhale her mixed blood and soap smell, watch her ever so slightly open her eyes and tighten her mouth as she tried to make sense of all the new sounds around her. My husband's laughter, my mother-in-law's comparison to relatives, both living and gone. I thought my daughter most resembled my mother and pointed at the picture to prove it. But I also saw traces of my father, who my mother says was too frightened to hold me and my brothers when we were babies, but who would later hold my brother's children, laugh, and sing to them. I grieve for all my family members who would never hold my daughter, and for my Haitian cousins who might never know her. Or maybe she would return to Haiti one day to declare in heavily accented words that they were her family. She might be honored by their nods of acknowledgement, the way they would be forced to consent Yes, of course, I see the resemblance. You do look like your great-grandmother's around the cheeks. You have the high forehead of your grandfather's kin. And hopefully those cheeks and that calabash-shaped forehead would gain her entry. Looking into my daughter's eyes, I thought of my mother, who had faced these first hours alone after I was born. She had been made no promises, had been offered no guarantees that either she or I would even live past the night. If something had been ruptured inside of her, no one would have noticed. If something had been broken inside of newborn me, perhaps no one but my mother would have cared. My daughter's quiet yet well-monitored first night was perhaps the one my mother had dreamed for me, for herself, a dream of kind words, kisses, flowers. "What have you decided to call her?" asked the midwife. My husband and I discussed it. There seemed no other possible choice. "Mira," I said, "for my dying father." After patiently waiting for his turn to hold her, my husband held out his hand. I was also reluctant to let this Mira go. Hopefully, I will have an uninterrupted lifetime with her, I thought, a lifetime to plant some things that have been uprooted in me and uproot others that had been planted. But surrender her I did, with an urgent wish to also hand her over to my father. "Gade, Papa. Look, Papa," I would say. "You have waited for her. You have lived long enough to see her. Today is not just her day, but all of our days. And we're not the only ones who will cradle and protect her. She will also hold and comfort us. She, too, will be our reposoir, our sacred place to rest."